Hi there, welcome back. In today's lesson, we're going to be writing an essay for an advantage-disadvantage question. Okay, let's have a look at an example. First, you'll have the statement. In many countries, parents are deciding to have children later in their lives. Afterwards, you'll get the question. Do you think the advantages of this development outweigh the disadvantages? Now, the question could appear in a slightly different way. It could be something like this. Is this a positive or negative development? Or something like this. Do the advantages of this development for the parents outweigh the disadvantages for the children? So if you get this type of question, make sure you're comparing the advantages of the parents with the disadvantages of the children. It's quite tricky, that. Okay, now, when it comes to writing an advantage-disadvantage essay, I suggest that you use the 70-30 structure, and I'll explain what that is. For example, if you get an advantage-disadvantage question, you might want to have 2 advantages and 1 disadvantage, and then to explain that you think the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. Or the other way around. You could say, for example, the disadvantages outweigh the advantages and show 2 disadvantages and 1 advantage. Now, imagine we're going to say that the advantages are greater than the disadvantages. Let's have a look at our essay structure. We're going to have an introduction, body paragraph 1, which looks at the disadvantages, or rather 1 disadvantage, and then we're going to have body paragraph 2, which has 2 advantages. So remember, we're saying the advantages are greater than the disadvantages. As always, we're going to finish with a conclusion. Okay, so in our introduction, we always need to do 2 things. We introduce the topic and respond to the question. So responding to the question is where we say, I think the advantages are greater than the disadvantages. Now, body paragraph 1, we'll look at 1 disadvantage, and we're going to have the topic, sentence, development, and ideally a link as well. In body paragraph 2, we've got 2 advantages, so we're going to have topic sentence 1, which introduces the 2 ideas, or tells the examiner that you're writing about the advantages this time. You're going to have the development and the link for idea number 1, and then we're going to have topic sentence 2, which introduces the second advantage, a development, and ideally also a link. Finally, we're going to have the conclusion, which restates our position, where we say that we think the advantages are greater than the disadvantages, and we summarize the ideas found in our essay. Okay, the first thing that we're going to do when we get a question like this is to brainstorm ideas. Okay, when it comes to brainstorming, it's a very good idea to brainstorm from multiple perspectives. So in this case, we've got the perspective of the children and also the parents. So we can think about advantages and disadvantages from both the perspective of the children and the parents as well. So remember, we need advantages and disadvantages, and in our case, because we're saying that the advantages outweigh the disadvantages, we're going to have 2 advantages and just 1 disadvantage. Okay, here's 1 advantage. Well, older parents are usually more financially secure. So, for example, they can pay for schooling or activities. That's because they've had longer to develop their careers and to save up money. Another advantage is that older parents are usually more wise and emotionally ready to have children. Okay, this isn't necessarily my view, but it's the view that I'm going to take for this essay. We also need a disadvantage of having children later in life. Well, if you're a younger parent, maybe it's easier to have a better relationship with your children because you're closer in age and you have more in common, and you're also physically more able to keep up with your children and get involved in games and sports. Okay, now as I mentioned, in this case we're going to say that the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. So let's plan our essay. So advantages are greater than disadvantages. We need 1 disadvantage, and that is that younger parents have a better relationship with children So that's a disadvantage for having children later in life. And we also knew two advantages. The first one is that older parents tend to be more financially secure and more emotionally ready to have children. Okay, now let's write the introduction. So our introduction needs to do two things. It needs to introduce the topic and respond to the question. So first, let's introduce the topic. This involves writing the statement in our own words and introducing the theme of our essay. In the past, it was common for couples to settle down and have children in their early 20s. Nowadays, many are waiting until their 30s or later to start a family. Okay, we've introduced the topic. Next, let's respond to the question. So, responding to the question is where we give our position, where we give our opinion. Despite potentially being more difficult to form close relationships with children, I would argue that having children at a later age is more advantageous, as parents tend to be more financially and emotionally prepared to start a family. Okay, so our introduction has introduced the topic and responded to the question. Let's move on to body paragraph 1. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, body paragraph 1 is going to look at the disadvantage. So one disadvantage, and we're going to have the topic sentence, development, and ideally a link. We start with the topic sentence, and this sentence needs to make it very clear to the examiner that this paragraph is about the disadvantages. Those that argue that the disadvantages of having children later in life point to the benefits of having youthful parents. Development. It is often easier for children to have closer relationships with parents who are not too distant in age. This is true on a psychological and physical level. Psychologically, younger parents are more likely to have shared interests, while physically, younger parents have more energy for playing games and sports with their children. Okay, finally, let's end with a link. Hence, in the interest of having a closer relationship with their children, many parents choose to have children earlier. Okay, so body paragraph 1 has introduced the side that we don't fully agree with, the disadvantages. Next, we're going to introduce the advantages. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to include two advantages in this paragraph. And remember, you can, for example, break up the advantages into separate paragraphs. That's totally fine. In this case, we're going to put them in the same paragraph. So we're going to have topic sentence 1, development and link for one idea, and then we're going to look at the other idea and also have a topic sentence, a development and a link for that idea. So let's start with topic sentence 1. We need to make it clear that we need to make it clear to the examiner that we're talking about the advantages now. However, I would argue that there are more advantages of having children later in life. Development. Firstly, mature parents are usually in a better financial position and are therefore better able to cater to their child's needs, schooling, excursions, activities, etc. Link. In contrast, younger parents are less likely to be established in their careers and may not have the financial means to provide for their children. Okay, so for the first advantage, we've gone through a topic sentence, a development, and a link. So therefore, our idea is fully developed. Let's do the same now for our second advantage. Topic sentence. Secondly, older parents are also usually more emotionally stable and wise. Development. This creates a more steady and peaceful upbringing for their offspring, as well as a store of knowledge and wisdom which can be used to guide their children. Finally, we end with a link. The better prepared the parents are, the easier it will be to raise a family. Okay, so for each idea, we've gone through having a topic sentence, a development, and a link. Now, finally, we write the conclusion. Now remember, your essays need to have a conclusion. It's very important, otherwise you'll get a substantially lower mark. Okay, in our conclusion, we're going to restate the position and summarize our ideas. So, To conclude, while I acknowledge that having children earlier has certain advantages in terms of physical and psychological bonding, I would argue that because of the financial and emotional stability that older parents have, the advantages of having children later in life outweigh the disadvantages. So we restate our position and we summarize our ideas. Now, they don't necessarily have to be in that order. As you can see in this conclusion, we've first restated our ideas and then we've used this phrase, because of the financial and emotional stability that older parents have, and then we give our position. The advantages of having children later in life outweigh the disadvantages. Okay, I hope that helps. Now it's time for you to write some advantage-disadvantage questions. Best of luck with your studies, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Bye then.